Okay, so I think we're at 2 o'clock. Yeah, so I'm going to do a talk about the Fedora Workstation, and well, first of all, let me apologize. I actually managed to get a quite bad cold last Friday, so I've basically been spending the last 4 days in a not perfect state. So my mind is a bit slow, sort of feels like it's running 3 BSD. So have some patience with me as I try to work my way through the slides I put together. But as I was putting this slide set together, I sort of realized I wasn't actually even sure about what I was supposed to talk about. Because, I mean, there's a million different angles we can sort of take in terms of talking about the workstation, and this being my first vlog, I wasn't even sure what necessarily people would be expecting. So, the talk as it is sort of a little bit high level, talk about the sort of general overall ideas that we're trying to push, but I hope to have a bit of time at the end for questions, so if you want me to go in a very different direction, feel free to ask questions, and I'm happy to do that too. So, yes, this is my first vlog. So my name is Fredrik Schaller, and I've been involved with Linux for quite a long time. As I put on the slides here, I actually have been using Red Hat Linux from 1997. And been basically using it non-stop since, going through the different iterations of first Red Hat Linux and then Fedora Core and now Fedora. I've been working professionally around Linux for more or less the last 9 years, predominantly doing consultancy business around the Decent Multimedia project. But 2 years ago I joined Red Hat. And I'm currently then managing what is called the emerging platform team, which consists of the desktop team and which includes graphics and spikes, in addition to core desktop issues, and also the installer team and the Fedora team. So I guess the first question anyone would probably ask when we talk about the workstation or any kind of desktop project on Linux is why we're doing it, because as everyone knows, right, the desktop is dying. So there's no point, basically. Well, I think that's basically bullshit. I mean, the desktop is not dying. I mean, sure, there's a change in the marketplace, and some use cases, especially sort of consumption type use cases, are moving maybe to be done on phones or tablets. But I mean, if you have something selling 305 million units, I feel it's a little bit harsh to consider it dying. I mean, if 305 million potential users is not enough, then you know, I think you have a different problem than that the desktop is dying. So the desktop is vibrant, but of course, you know, it's the core areas of the desktop might be slightly changing because it may be becoming less of a consumption platform and more of a creation platform. So of course, another popular meme over the last years that's always sort of become almost a bit embarrassing is this the year of the Linux desktop? And you know, I'm actually decided to stand up and say probably that I think it actually is this time. Chromebooks accounted for 35% of all commercial laptop sales in the US between January and May this year, according to NPD. And for instance, also Steam has now over 600 games for Linux. So I think, you know, maybe it wasn't exactly what maybe people envisioned, you know, when we started talking about Linux desktops 5 years ago, or 10 years ago rather.
Is a games console is a games console a Linux desktop then?
Well, it could be to some degree, right? I mean, it at least provides us. I mean, everything that goes on the Steam box runs on the desktop too. So it creates a possible way for us to enter a market where we currently have been dead, right? And the same thing with Chromebooks. I mean, they're not maybe exactly what anyone who has been working on GNOME or KDE or XFCE or something over the last 10 years had expected, but it's definitely a Linux desktop in my opinion. And I mean, as far as I can tell from news stories, it's still doing very well, especially in North America. So that's, I guess, sort of, I mean, a combination of the fact that there is still millions of PCs or PC-type hardware sold every year, and that this is going to be the year of the Linux desktop, makes me think that there is it's worthwhile to do the Fedora workstation. So I put the word philosophy into the headline of the talk, and I sort of regretted it later on, but I feel compelled to follow up. So of course, when we decided to do the workstation, and of course the whole Fedora Next thing happened, you know, there needed to be maybe some overreaching ideas about, you know, what are we trying to achieve here, and sometimes what are the guidelines for trying to achieve it. So I've been stealing a few things from various people here to put into my talk. This was actually something I stole from Matthew Garrett. I think the Fedora Workstation and Fedora as such has a great opportunity to, because it's in some sense only desktop product out there at the moment that doesn't try to sell you. Because every other, like, you know, Windows, Mac OS X, Ubuntu and so on, in some sense you are a product to them that they are selling to people who want to sell to you. So I mean, it's you know, and the same with, of course, with Android and so on. It's like, you know, you're the product that you're selling to people who either want to advertise towards you or to sell you some further products. So I mean, people can get the Fedora Workstation and know that, you know, this is actually something where we're not actually trying to sell you something, or especially we're not trying to sell your personal information to someone in order to finance the workstation. And for the same reason, that means you will be the desktop that actually respects your privacy and tries to avoid, you know, having by default all your data sent to Amazon or which other vendor is interested in your information. So this is actually one I stole from Gabe Newell. And I think another principle is that we should double down on openness, and with that I mean, you know, we should make sure that our platform is a platform where anyone can come and, you know, deploy applications or write applications for it, or for that matter, you know, provide in their shops. So, like, you know, the thing is, we are not in the business of running a web shop. So, for instance, if Steam wants to sell games to Fedora users, you know, we are not trying to compete with them. Or if anyone else, if what to call it, Good Old Games wants to sell games to Linux users. Once again, we are not in the business of trying to compete with them. So I think we have in some sense, a unique position in that we can say that, you know, we are a platform where anyone who wants to come to us has a chance to you know, compete on equal terms, because we are not like a vendor who's ourselves in the business of basically trying to sell products to our users. So that's sort of maybe some more general sort of philosophical music of how we position ourselves with the workstation, and then in some sense position ourselves with Fedora, I think, overall. But of course there's also things that play specifically into both the workstation and sometimes what we achieve by, for instance, having moved to this three-product model. So up to this point, at least in my opinion, and you can disagree, but Fedora has been, you know, I call it a loose collection of things that are vaguely connected, and in some sense the unifying point of Fedora has in some sense been, you know, things being RPM packaged for Fedora. While when we now build these three products, you have a chance to actually start defining standards for the products and saying, like, okay, you know, if you are going to do something and you want to do it for Fedora, there's a, you know, a way to do that. I mean, I remember over the years there have been a lot of people asking, like, oh, so if I want to, you know, port my application to Linux or to Fedora, how do I do that? And it's never really had a good answer, because it's always been like, well, you know, there's 7 million desktops and 500 toolkits, and you know, how things work might, you know, change depending on the time of day. And thus, for someone doing important work, like, you know, any integration point is hard to figure out what it's supposed to be. And I think by having, you know, a clear product that this is like the Fedora workstation or the Fedora desktop or whatever you want to call it, we are able to start creating standards so that, for instance, if you are doing an application and you want to say, okay, I'm going to bring that to Fedora, you know, you can easily know that, okay, one of the requirements if you want to bring a desktop application to Fedora is that you need to provide app data, for instance, for that file. Because that's the standard way you have defined provide metadata about their application, and that's so that's what you need to provide. At the same point, it means that if you're let's say you for some reason absolutely hate the standard software installer, you also know that, hey, if I want to write alternative software installer for Fedora, I know that, okay, well, I have to have something that can parse and read that data. So it sort of goes both ways, that we by having a clear, this is our standard, it makes it easier both for external people and internal people to actually start doing things, because there isn't a question about like, well, X uses Y and B, Z uses this, and so on and so on. Which brings me to the next point, that having one product, brings cohesion, because it helps us create basic standards that people can conform to, and it means that up to this point, if you're a third-party application developer, your motivation to even bother trying to do something, in terms of integrating Fedora, for instance, we all feel like a useless exercise because there is no Fedora to integrate with. And thus, of course, we have the situation we had for a long, long time in the Linux space, where every application looks different and feels different and does things different. While, of course, if there's one target, you know what to target. I mean, if you write an app application, a map application, there's no doubt, right? You can use a lot of different toolkits and tools to write your application, but you still have a fair idea about what it should look like to actually feel like it belongs here, and what sort of basic features are expected of your application to sort of fit into the ecosystem. And I think that's one of the values by having something as a Fedora workstation actually brings us, is that you can suddenly know that, okay, hey, if I want to try to integrate, this is the way to do it. So that's sort of, I guess it's sort of my high-level thoughts around, how do we position ourselves, and then what value proposition does having something like a workstation or a Fedora server or a Fedora cloud which brings. It means that there's, I guess for the first time, a clear identity of what Fedora is. So, as you go forward, of course, what does all this mean going forward? Because, I mean, doing the workstation or the Fedora server or anything else, of course, it's not just of course over labeling or just providing standards, but it's also, of course, like trying to set a technological direction. And I mean, one thing I've been pushing hard inside Red Hat is that, I mean, I think the traditional development model inside Red Hat has been that, and we push stuff upstream, then they get built for Fedora as a sort of test bed almost, and then of course they eventually end up in RHEL. And of course that's still, on a purely technical level, needs to be how often things are done, right? Because you don't want to start building up a huge cache of downstream patches. But what I've been saying is that we need to change our mindset in terms of like that our development goals need to be set from the perspective of what we need for our products, as opposed to what any given upstream project feels is their priorities. And of course, I guess the good thing is, of course, that I mean for people who work at Red Hat or also for people in the community, is that of course being, since a lot of us are, I mean, we're not just members of the Fedora community or the RHEL community, but we're also members of these upstream communities. We do know that, let's say, we need a specific feature for the workstation or for the server. We know how we can make those features and make sure that they are done in a way that is acceptable to the upstream community. Even though they might not be the top priority of the said upstream community. So that's I guess sort of my approach to how we want to do the workstation is that it's about what frame of mind we have in terms of approaching this, and that is like okay, what we need, and then how do we align resources inside Red Hat and in the community behind making sure that we reach those goals. So I'm going to actually go into a few sort of concrete things that we are definitely pushing hard for the workstation going forward. And I think the number one thing is containers. I mean, there's a big effort, of course, going on in sort of general Fedora land and in Red land around Docker. And I mean, I think in the Fedora community there's probably a lot of different opinions about, doing, application bundles and doing containers applications versus sticking with the current model. But once again, I mean, going also back to my mantra of like, we need to double down on openness, is that I think containers also provide us with the first chance in a long time to actually try to define something that can be used across distributions, so that we actually, create a bigger shared platform, as opposed to, everyone being in their own little niche. There, of course, is a risk that this, like any other effort, become, like that classic, comic strip about, like, when you have 12 standards, you try to fix it with the 13th one. But I do think and hope in this case that that's not going to be the issue. Partially because containers is not just about, finding a new way to package and install applications, but it's also about improving security. And it also makes it a lot easier for third-party vendors again to support us, because our platform will become much less of a moving target with this model. So there's a lot of work currently happening around doing containers. I mean, we have been sort of pushing hard on putting in place a lot of the prerequisites to do containers. For those who went to Matthias's talk about the Wayland, I mean, that's one core piece. Because especially for desktop applications, doing containers in a X world, well, to some degree they limit their usability, because once they all share the same X context, so data can easily be stolen. I mean, at Godek actually last week, Jasper St. Pierre was running a demo application where he demonstrated that, and that there's almost like a special X extension custom made for stealing your password. So we can fix that with Wayland, and of course, so Wayland has been one of the sort of big pushes we've been doing for the workstation to try to get that to usable level. And I think we're getting close. I mean, as Matthias mentioned in his talk, we will not be there 100% for Fedora 21, but we will have what I will think is for most people will be a functional Wayland desktop for Fedora 21, and then we can have for Fedora 22 hopefully what I will define as a full-featured one. And as Matthias also mentioned, I mean, the goal with Wayland specifically, of course, is that our users shouldn't really need to know that they got switched over from X to Wayland. The more they are aware of this, in my opinion, the more we have failed in making that transition seamless. Another part that we've been working on in terms of containers is trying to basically define the structure of them. I mean, on the low-end side, of course, containers for the workstation is going to be exactly like containers everywhere else. I mean, they're going to be based on the kernel Linux containers. But there are also a lot of things that for this application is needed that is not really relevant for, or at least a lot less relevant, I would say, for a server application. Like we need, for instance, like if you're running an application, you want to be able to have, you might, for instance, want to have access to a shared calendar for the whole desktop, which is running maybe inside a different container, or outside the container for that matter. You might want access to your webcam or your microphone from inside the container. So in some sense we need a lot more granular control of exactly, and have a clear defined path for how all these containers applications will be able to reach out beyond the container. I mean, as mentioned, there's a lot of stuff happening around Docker, and I mean, we have been definitely looking at Docker and trying to figure out, what pieces we can reuse. Although I think it's at the same time clear that a lot of the tooling around Docker is of course specifically targeted around running server-side applications. I mean, at the moment the primary interface for the world outside a Docker container is of course the Ethernet port, or the network port, sorry. So I think what we're seeing is that, if you want to start an SQL server, for instance, on your desktop, we will definitely just use a standard Docker container for that. But if you want to run Firefox in a container, that probably won't be a Docker container per se. I mean, it will share what we can possibly share with Docker container, but it sort of becomes a bit of a misnomer, I think, to sort of call it Docker container, because we'll have needed to add so many extra layers on top of what Docker currently provides that, well, probably the people on the Docker trademark wouldn't want us to call what we are doing a Docker container at that point.
So before you leave that one, can you speak a little bit more about where you see the boundaries of the container being? How do you standardize a container? What services do you provide to it? I mean, you mentioned something like webcam and so on, but I'm thinking about file selection. My Firefox, I need to be able to save to a file where I can then pull those files into other applications. So I need access to my file store. Do you actually have a new API that Firefox is going to code against for this? Or do you let every application build their own, in which case you lost the commonality of the file selection dialogues? And there's all sorts of different ways to cut this. Is this still being developed, being discussed, or do you have a plan for it?
Yes, I mean, I think,
draw the line?
and Matthias, correct me if I'm misstating anything here, but I think our plan at the moment is, even for file access, we want to try to provide that through a dbus API. So switches, what I forgot to mention, of course, kdbus is another core part of this, so we can have do data transfer over dbus, high speeds and high volumes. So I think that's the current plan, basically, that if we want to basically, we have to request application that you have to use this dbus API to say, okay, I need file access, and that will have, Yeah.
So does the actual file selection dialog sit in the container or outside in that case? Is it just doing a file request over dbus, or is it actually talking to a file selection dialog over dbus?
No, I think it would be a higher level API. You would ask for, the application would ask, I want to open a document, or I want to open a photo or something, and then the desktop environment or the outside of the container would provide the UI for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Another core piece of what I'll actually come back to that later, but another core piece, of course, of what we see for the desktop is that, when you do a Docker container, at least traditionally, you would almost put your whole operating system that you need to run, whatever you need to run in there, right? For a desktop, very often, like, a combination of a lot of small applications, you don't necessarily want to have, 5 copies of your operating system or 500 copies of your operating system for every little tool that you run on your desktop. So we have this idea of also creating runtimes that are going to sort of be a standardized ABI runtime that the container should be able to depend on and call from outside the container. So that's another piece of the puzzle. But I will come
Please talk to the Docker folks on that, because we've got exactly the same problems there.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of this effort, at least from inside Red Hat and on the side, is led by Alex Larson, who's been quite active with the general Docker efforts inside Red Hat. So he's also currently trying to do an initial write-up of a lot of these policies that we see we need, and of course his goal is also to try to just figure out, where does it make sense to pull in stuff from Docker, or for that matter try to push stuff back to Docker, and where do we end up doing something that's sort of on the side that doesn't necessarily fit with the Docker model as such, but we need it because that's a use case for a desktop. Another crucial thing, of course, is growing the platform. There's, of course, many ways of doing that, but one of the, and of course, so one thing we're hoping to achieve with the desktop, right, is to actually start pulling in more users that so far has sort of shied away from Fedora for various reasons. Growing the platform is important for many reasons, right? One is, of course, making sure that third parties do want to bother supporting us. But it also is important in terms of making sure that Fedora becomes a natural starting point for the next generation of exciting technological developments. Because I think what we probably all would like to see, right, is that at least more often going forward when new efforts like efforts in so far like when you see things like OpenStack or Docker or Chrome OS for that matter or Steam OS and all these things. Fedora has not been the platform of choice for any of these efforts, and I think what we're hoping to do is that if you grow the platform and make it more popular as a workstation, as a development system, that will make sure that a few years down the line when the next big things come along, hopefully that will actually have been started on Fedora, and that's it, or maybe that's its initial deployment platform, as opposed to something that we sort of have to work hard on adding in later on. Yeah.
So what steps are you planning to take to try and, I assume a big piece of this will be publicity. So what sort of steps are you taking to grow the platform?
Yes. Well, on the publicity front, we haven't done that much yet. I mean, we have especially me and Matthias, have been started trying to be quite active on the blogging front, and we also try to solicit blogging from other people to just build general community interest. But of course, this is an area where we need to engage with the Fedora marketing groups and figure out how we can market the things we try to bring into the workstation to make it exciting for new users to try out and to join. The other thing I'm actually trying to look at is how we can achieve a situation where we don't, at least between Fedora and Red Hat, doesn't necessarily split our own platform. Because currently we have a situation where there's certain applications that are targeting Fedora, and there's certain applications targeting the RHEL workstation. And getting them to run in another environment isn't necessarily an easy task. Sorry. And of course a big part of the reason for that is of course that Fedora is a fast-moving system, while RHEL is trying to be the opposite. Yet my hope is that with a combination of these kind of APIs we define for the runtimes and in containers, and also looking at how we do, if there are things you can do, for instance, from gRPC and so on, to make it easier for a third-party vendor to basically set a flag or something, so that so when they compile, they can at least have a bigger chance of being sure to be able to support both. And I think that will be beneficial for everyone involved, because I mean, for RHEL, right? We recently hit the issue where Chrome didn't work anymore on RHEL 6 due to the Chrome binaries starting to use new APIs from GLC because they were available in Fedora, and vice versa. For instance, Maya is certified to run on RHEL, and it would be a shame if you can't make sure that Fedora users too have access to the application, because especially as we go forward and we want to sort of grow the potential user base for Fedora and Fedora Workstation. To me, for instance, people who are doing graphical design is a natural target as a sort of next step beyond developers, and especially as, for instance, we know that Valve and Steam OS are trying to pull these kind of developers into our sphere or influence. And I mean, as far as I know, there's more or less no top-tier game almost these days that isn't developed, for instance, using Maya as their primary tool. So I think we should use that to our advantage and see if we can make sure that we have things in place that ensures that Maya also works fine for people who want to run it on Fedora Workstation. Not to say that we shouldn't also, of course, support efforts like trying to trying to adjust Blender to be a more useful tool for game development, like Valve has been doing. this is a problem we're trying to talk to now called. And this is going back to containers and runtimes, and in some sense growing our platform. We want to try to find a way to actually have an API that is a real thing. I mean, I guess within a given Fedora release so far, there has been, yeah. I'm not sure eating candy and talking is the best thing either, but
Best I had,
yeah, inside a given Fedora release, there might sort of have been some attempts at trying to have API stability, but what we want to try to do here is actually define extended API as part of this container effort, saying like, hey, if you target these APIs, we will try to make our best to make sure that first of all the runtime, which we are going to version, is going to stay compatible and available for a long time going forward. And at the same time, we will then try to revise the platform not by just replacing packages, but actually having multiple runtimes as time goes by, so that you can always ship your application and be sure that the runtime version 1 is available and that should work. Well, always, at least for a very long time period. But of course, if you want access to new features, you then need to sort of port your application to, let's say, runtime version 2. And I think this is a crucial piece in sort of making our platform more viable, because you become a lot less of a moving target, but at the same time, we don't need to hold development back because our developers can then decide if they want to target the older API or a newer one.
Sorry, just a question. Do you envision that being delivered by the kind of containers? In a sense?
Yes. I mean, that it will be part of the container for that. Like you define the API that your container application is meant to use, which is a combination of the DBus APIs you provide and of course its runtime. And as long as that's what you're targeting, then your application should be at least viable for the next 10 years if you don't bother updating it.
So would there be, as part of that, would there be any thought to doing, for example, back-end changes to things like the Qt toolkit to use the same API, so you've got the same ability to run Qt applications inside those containers? Or
I think, at least my thinking so far on that is that what we will expect to see instead, that it will be a given set of runtimes defined that in some cases might overlap each other or have different features. So maybe what you'll see, instead of trying to do a call it a joint GTK Qt runtime, there will be like a GTK style runtime and a Qt style runtime, and then as an application developer you choose which runtime you actually want to depend on. And I think a big part of what we're hoping to do there with those runtimes is that we don't necessarily want to maintain them on a Fedora level. We're hoping to get some of the upstream communities to maintain their own runtimes so that they can also be more easily shared between a wider selection of distributions. So when we sort of announced the workstation, and of course a lot of the work and the plans so far have been talking about like we want to make it a developer workstation, and that's definitely true. But for me, I see that just as like the first step, because as mentioned when I talked earlier about the desktop part in general, I can see that a lot of use cases are moving to tablets or phones in terms of viewing or consuming media or reading. But I think for people who create stuff, be that writing code, writing books for that matter, making art, making music, I don't think the laptop or the desktop will go away for these people anyway soon. I think it will be their primary tool for a long time. So my hope is that as we go forward, step 1, get the developers on board. Step 2, target these different creative groups and bring them on board and basically try to become the platform for creators. That's my long-term vision for the workstation. And in that regard, I mean, I really want to build on the strengths we have. As I said, like, you know, RHEL is currently the only Linux version that's actually certified to run Maya, and I would love somehow to extend that to at least have some kind of partial support for Fedora too, so that, you know, if we get people into the Fedora workstation, they can get Maya and run it on their Fedora workstations, and that, for instance, will help us greatly in targeting that segment of the market. So, challenges. I mean, there's a lot of things, of course, you have to do to be successful here. And I mean, Stephen asked about marketing. I mean, that's definitely one item. And of course, there's a lot of these technical things that we need to get in place, and I think we need to get them in place relatively quickly. I mean, we don't want to spend 10 years, for instance, defining our desktop container story, because I think at that point the train has left the station a long time ago. So that's maybe challenge number one. We have a lot of ground to cover. And I mean, I think anyone who's been involved in open source for a long time knows that in some sense we are always in this continuous situation of resource sparseness. Because in some sense, no matter how many people bring in, we always feel that, you know, there's a million things that should be done or ideally could be done. So, I mean, in terms of marketing, we also need to really try to figure out, you know, better ways of working with our upstreams, to try to energize them around what we're doing and get them to contribute. Another big challenge, of course, is that, you know, what's happening around Fedora Next and the products is a big change for the Fedora community. And I mean, there's already been, of course, many discussions about various aspects of what, you know, the products are trying to do, or the products themselves, or you know, if doing this is the right thing at all. And I'm expecting that, you know, as we move forward with the true product model, there will be, you know, a period of adjustment for everyone involved, and we're trying to sort of figure out who does what, who decides what, how do you decide things, and all these things. So that's a, you know, part of the challenge here. The other big challenge, which is actually a challenge for the desktop itself, is the fact that, you know, desktop applications are becoming, I mean, new desktop applications are becoming rarer and rarer. I mean, we have a lot of these, call it old projects, but also old pieces of software that I think will remain crucial for a long time. And I mean, we have things like Blender and GIMP and Inkscape and all these tools that, I mean, I'm sure they will stay around, they will not become web apps. But a lot of the sort of new things happening these days are all happening as web apps. And that's both a great opportunity for us, right? Because it means, well, you know, we run the browser as well as anyone else. So if someone writes writing as web app, it automatically supports our platform. Yet at the same point, it becomes less of our platform actually targeting. I was actually looking at some internal users at Red Hat a couple of weeks ago who are working in some of our other teams, and I noticed that some of them more or less literally never open any other application than the browser. Because, you know, they check their email through the browser, their job is more or less controlled by maybe 2 or 3 web apps.
But they can't do that without a Mac.
Yeah, well, some of them, you know, might end up using other operating systems, but then that's, you know, it's both opportunities, right? Because there's nothing hindering people. If all you need is web apps, then of course, hey, you can run web apps. But on the other side, it sort of makes the desktop feel a little bit more relevant, right? Because it becomes a browser launcher almost. Yet I think, I mean, there's a lot of things we can do, and I mean, I think one thing we've been trying to do in the workstation is try to figure out, you know, how we can make a lot of these web apps feel more like they belong in the desktop as opposed to being something you just run in a browser. And as I mean, interesting example there, I was talking to someone about why they were not using Linux, and I said, well, there's no version of TweetDeck for Linux. And when I got that question, I never heard of TweetDeck, and I wasn't even sure what it was, apart from assuming it was something related to Twitter. So I ended up Googling, and it turns out the TweetDeck is literally tweetdeck.twitter.com. It is web app. So I discovered that in some sense the problem there was not necessarily about availability, but maybe discoverability. And it means that, you know, it was an easy request to fulfill, right? Because we all we needed to do is make sure that we offer easy access to this web application. Which brings me, I guess, to my last item here. I mean, I think there will be a lot of, I mean, we already have some discussions in the Fedora community, and I think we will probably have more going forward, because I think there will be a lot of cases where we end up having discussions about, you know, usability versus ideology. I mean, TweetDeck, I guess, is a good example, right? I mean, it's, this user in this example wasn't aware that it existed. If we had already added it to our list of web apps in the software installer, they would have been easily able to find it. Yet, of course, it's sort of, depending on what your view of what a web page or a web app actually is, you know, it's not at least a traditional free software application where you have some source code that's available and it's all running on your desktop. And I think that will be, you know, an ongoing challenge for us as we go forward, as we need to navigate and you know, find compromises and ways to deal with these things where we try to, you know, at one time, you know, satisfy and make things easy for users, but at the same time, you know, make sure that we don't lose our values in the process. So. Yeah, so that was basically my talk. I realized it was a little bit all over the place. I apologize for that, but that was, I blame the cold. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Or was it so brilliant that you're all just sitting here and at this point?
So just a question on the kind of publicity side, right? Personally, I think the aspect of targeting particular niche user groups is very, very helpful to that publicity side, right? You know, yeah, technically speaking, it's a smaller overall body count, right, than all computer users ever, right? But I just think if we can really help to focus on that, you know, targeted user group, as you say, maybe it's a continuum of kind of types of users, but really wrap a lot of that marketing or that publicity or the story, you know, kind of in talks like this or the one I'm giving, you know, is that if we can start to think about, you know, how can we really start talking up that this is really targeted at this user group, and let's even somewhat sarcastically talk about how, you know, there's all these other user groups that can go use something else. Because I think that really can help bring that story around.
It does not only help with regards to the messaging, but also once those users are happy, they're gonna talk good about your product.
Right.
And then you have like a critical mass of.
Well, the other thing too that you know from leading development teams, right, is that if the individual developers know the strategy, they make the right little decisions. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that developers make little decisions all the time that have huge impact on your overall strategy of your application. So if you have a clearly defined mission, I also think you end up with better, like, technical product as well. You know.
Any other questions or comments?
I may have missed it during the talk because I wasn't listening the whole time, but what is the plan, along with the sort of medium, long-term plan for service integration through GOA? Like, do you have a sort of roadmap for what's going to be built next? What's the highest priority?
Or a nice API.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't think we have a big roadmap. I mean, I think one thing we have been discussing that we want to put in place in terms of service integration is make sure that we have a better integration in file manager for Google Drive.
Yeah.
Because currently there is some support. I mean, you can, if you go into the documents thing, you can print to Google Drive, but it's sort of a little bit weird way of storing stuff there. And so that's one thing. Another thing we have been discussing, but we haven't really gone into details, is trying to maybe figure out ways you can actually integrate into some of these software development systems out there.
Like you have GitHub account maybe.
Yes, and figure out if there's intelligent things you can do with having that account shared in Goa.
So at a very high level, what we tend to think about the GOA and what we go there is not in terms of what can we add to GOA, but what desktop features can we create that integrate with online accounts and use GOA accounts as a tool to get there. But we always try to think about the service integration first and the account integration second.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that could be quite interesting to look at, I discussed it briefly at DevConf last year with Tom Callaway, was if there's a way we can integrate the Fedora account system in Goa and figure out if there's smart things we can do with that. But I mean, it's a bit hand-wave at the moment because we haven't sat down and really concretized what that integration would actually mean or what value it would bring. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so Matthew Garrett mentioned, I think in his Guardic keynote, about building a secure desktop for users. What's the thoughts and possible direction on that concept?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I don't want to talk too much, but I mean, I think at least in his vision too, I mean, this idea of trying to build the desktop for our own container-based applications is a big part of that. I'm sure there's other things you can do, but at the moment, I think that's at least the one big item on the agenda is that the containers applications will help with a lot of security issues because there's a lot of things people might want to run, and I mean, for instance, personally, I from time to time I still hit cases, for instance, where I still need to actually run Adobe Acrobat as opposed to running one open source PDF viewers. I mean, luckily it's getting less and less every year, but once in a while that one document triggers, and it would be nice, for instance, if we can come up with a way to run Acrobat or have it available for people containerized, because it's not really well maintained anymore by Adobe, but it's still something people might need to use to get their job done.
Was it ever well maintained?
Oh, well, that's another question. I don't want to be too nasty on them since we might need them to just do some work.
But I mean, what about integration with like ensuring secure web pages by default and verification of certificates right through the entire stack? Because I know things like I don't believe libsuit does proper certificate checking of revocation lists and stuff like that, and basically that's what pretty much all of, say, the non-stack users for any sort of SSL services.
libsuit does do full certificate verification.
According to some of the known tickets it doesn't, but maybe they just haven't been updated.
I'm not sure, and certainly it does look at this certificate store and so forth, so.
Okay.
We do think more.
Yeah, I mean it's important. I mean it's beyond my scope of technical detail understanding issues. So, but I mean, feel free to bring it up onto our desktop list, and we're happy to take that discussion and figure out if there's things we can do. Because I mean that's the other thing here, of course, is that I think a big part of the success of Fedora Workstation or Fedora Server or the Fedora Cloud for that matter. I mean it's not just about what call it the current working group wants to do, but it's also about what everyone else can bring to the table. And I'm more than happy to if you have insights into, for instance, how to improve security. I'm personally at least very happy to hear about that and see what we can do.
All right, so we're running out of time. Last question.
Okay, well, I have to comment from Mismo. She was typing the session. One of that is that if you could bring up, basically, we target creatives, designers, filmmakers, musicians at SXSW about 3 years ago, and we got a lot of interest. This is about the marketing and bringing more people. And there is a question if any thoughts about tighter integration with Flow's app collaboration platform like Collab or OnCloud. And part of the question is promoting those Flow's platform while at the same time providing usability to the mainstream proprietary ones, maybe.
Okay, I'm not sure I fully understood.
So I'm not sure that the desktop itself is going to take Google Drive or Google's plethora of services that they provide and figure out a way for OwnCloud to compete against that. That's not necessarily the desktop job. Promoting that and integrating it with the desktop is certainly something that can be done. through GOA or whatever the case
Which we
may
actually
be.
do. I mean, OnCloud
Yeah.
is currently, it's the only service currently that actually shows up in Nautilus, as you said earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Right.
what I like to have the node's integration with OwnCloud is allow the advertisement of multiple services running, because the problem I have with it right now is that you can actually, like my mail is hosted on the same server. No, mail's not a good idea. But anyway, I have other services hosted on the same domain as OwnCloud, which use the same identity. But there's no way I or even someone else could tell Gnome this identity on this server gives access to OwnCloud, it gives access to mail, it gives access to all these other services. There's no kind of generic API for that. So I have to configure them all separately, even though they're all backed by the same free IPA installation. And that it would be nice to be able
like desktop SSO, basically.
Yeah, or it's but not the implementation of the SSO, but just so that GOA, there's some way you can tell GOA, on this domain, all these
Yeah,
services
all
are backed by
these
this
services
ID.
are Kerberos backed by
Right.
this
It would-
realm or
It
something.
would definitely be nice if there was an identity management settings screen in a sense where you kind of said, okay, this user is attached to this service, this same user is attached to this other service, and then you could also change all the passwords at once.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was thinking about
or
the
everything
idea
that-
to implement on your server, so that when GOA talks to the server, it finds out all the services that are on that server. So then when you're the
Right.
user just sitting in front of the box, all you do is enter your identity, Adam W, happy assassin, and magically everything pops up.
Yeah, or
I don't
everything's
want
happy
to
assassin.
stop you, but we're short on time.
Yeah,
You guys
sorry.
are engineering things. So take this to a hackfest. But back to the original question. I mean, providing access to those FLOSS services and applications is very important. But it can only be done so far, right? It's not the desktop's platform's job to say, if somebody searches for Google Drive, because that's what they have all their stuff in, to pop up OwnCloud and say, you need to use this instead, right? I mean, if the distributions want to do that and promote FLOSS through that, that's a choice they can make. But I don't necessarily think it's the desktop's job to get in the way of the users if they're already ingrained in that ecosystem.
But there's a point there where OwnCloud is on the secondary screen of the,
Sure, I
the
mean-
thing, which it doesn't need to be, right? It's not in the it's not in the primary option list. It's on the go see other services.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay, to answer to one general comment, if people have feature requests for online accounts or suggestions for how we can improve it, Raider Bosch sits down there in the corner and just spoke. He's a maintainer and so on, and he will be here the whole week, so you can harass him really.
All right, we need to move out. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to grab the